A single glance can burn down an empire, and today that spark began from seat 2A. The Airbus A350 of Lumen Air had just leveled off into the New York twilight. In the first-class cabin, amber light shimmered over crystal glasses, tailored suits, and the gleam of Swiss watches. The scent of Italian leather mixed with expensive perfume, the air heavy with the quiet arrogance of those accustomed to floating above the clouds. In the first row sat Adrian Cross, a tall, dark-skinned man of 43, calmly reading the financial news on his iPad. His charcoal suit fit perfectly around his strong frame, and his Oxford shoes shone like mirrors. No one in the cabin knew that just a few hours earlier, this man had closed a $1.8 billion deal, acquiring a failing robotics company and turning it into the newest jewel in the crown of Onyx Capital Partners, the empire he had built with his own hands from a rented room no bigger than a matchbox. But in this cabin, no one cared about that. All they saw was a man of color in a suit too perfect to belong here. The click of heels stopped before the seat 2A. "Sir," a woman's voice said, soft but edged with suspicion. Brooke Turner, the chief flight attendant, nearly 40, with a smile as thin as a blade. Beneath her carefully painted face was a gaze both professional and doubtful. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin, sir?" The question landed like a cold slap, not because of the words, but because of the look. A look he had seen 1,000 times in 5-star hotel lobbies, corporate receptions, and every room where power and prejudice crossed paths. Adrian looked up, his voice low and steady. "Quite sure. My seat is 2A. Brooke hesitated for half a second, then the fake smile returned. "Of course, but just to be certain, may I see your boarding pass?" The cabin fell silent. A silver-haired man behind him lowered his Financial Times and glanced over. A model pretended to scroll through her phone, but froze mid-gesture. They said nothing, yet their eyes wrote an unspoken verdict. Adrian opened his briefcase, took out his thick boarding pass, and handed it to her. Brooke examined it longer than necessary, turning it over as if hunting for a mistake. "Everything seems to be in order," she said finally, dragging out her words. "We just have to be careful, you know. Sometimes economy passengers wander into the wrong cabin." She walked away, leaving a trail of frost in the air. Adrian closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Memories flooded in, security guards asking to check his bag at luxury stores, waiters handing the bill to his companion instead of him. Every time he endured it, knowing that anger only made their prejudice feel justified. He put on Bach, the deep cello notes wrapping around him like armor, trying to detach himself from the small world around him. But peace never lasts long. A light tap on his shoulder. Brooke again, her tone firmer this time. "Sir, your briefcase needs to go in the overhead bin. It can't stay on the floor during takeoff." Adrian opened his eyes. The slim leather case sat neatly under his seat, exactly where regulations allowed. He gestured calmly. "My case is within safety limits. The passenger next to me has a much larger bag." Brooke glanced at seat 2B, where a young tech heir was laughing over a glass of champagne. Her cheeks flushed, then she straightened and said sharply, "Are you refusing to follow my safety instructions, sir?" A question disguised as an order. Adrian stayed silent for a few seconds, then stood up slowly and placed the case in the overhead compartment. Not because she was right, but because he knew reason would never win here. Brooke smiled, victory glinting in her eyes. "Thank you for your cooperation." Adrian sat back down, replaced his headphones, but the music had turned hollow. Anger pressed in his chest, not burning, but freezing, solid, sharp, controlled. Then came fate's third visit. As he spoke quietly on the phone with his London office to confirm the car on arrival, Brooke stopped again by his seat, her tone cutting. "Sir, I need you to turn off your phone immediately. We're about to push back." Adrian ended the call and raised his screen, showing the airplane mode icon. "I've complied with your request, ma'am." Brooke folded her arms, her voice icy. "I don't appreciate your attitude. Since boarding, you've been nothing but problematic." The word problematic fell like acid. A man who built an empire on discipline and precision was now labeled a troublemaker. His tone dropped, his gaze sharp. "You don't have a problem with the bag. You don't have a problem with the phone. You just have a problem with me." There was no space left between them. In that first-class cabin, under the warm golden light, two worlds collided, one built on silent power, the other on borrowed authority wrapped in uniform. When Brooke turned away, her lips tightened. "I'll call the captain," she said. Adrian leaned back, exhaling slowly. He didn't know that in just a few minutes, the world would witness how one wrong look could bring down an entire airline. He opened his eyes and stared out the window. Along the runway, blue lights slid past the aircraft's body like lines underlining destiny. And in seat 2A sat a man who had just been underestimated by everyone, about to become the most powerful person they would ever fear. The cabin door closed with a dry click. The overhead lights dimmed, turning first class into its own world, quiet, polished, luxurious, and simmering beneath the surface. Adrian Cross closed his eyes, but his mind refused to rest. The cello of Bach still played through his headphones, yet the melody could no longer drown out the coldness tightening in his chest. He was no stranger to prejudice, only this time it was happening in the most expensive corner of the sky, where people believed that money could buy respect. But he knew better. Money couldn't buy fairness. Brooke Turner returned once more. She always picked the worst possible moments. "Sir," her voice syrupy and insincere, "I need to ensure your luggage isn't blocking the emergency exit." Adrian opened his eyes. "I already stowed it." "I'm sorry, but I need to check for myself." She bent down, eyes scanning like a detective searching for evidence. The passenger beside him, the young tech heir, let out a low chuckle and began recording with his phone. A sharp, refined humiliation crawled through Adrian's nerves. Brooke straightened, nodding. "Good. This time it's fine." Her tone carried the smugness of a teacher correcting a stubborn student. Adrian turned toward the window, his fingers tightening slightly around the armrest. Every negotiation tactic, every leadership lesson, every skill in emotional control he had learned from decades of billion-dollar deals, all of it had to be summoned now, just to keep her from seeing his anger. But Brooke wasn't finished. She turned toward seat 2B, leaning closer. "Would you like another glass of champagne, sir?" "Oh, perfect," the blonde man smiled. "Thank you, Brooke." They laughed together, the sound sharp as breaking glass. As Brooke walked away, Adrian heard the man murmur under his breath, just loud enough for him to catch. "Can't believe they let People like that sit up here. Brooke didn't respond, just a brief silence. But that silence was complicity. Adrian closed his eyes again. Inside his mind, his father's voice echoed, the voice of a man who once worked in a steel mill in Chicago. Don't react with anger, son. That's what they want. Anger proves them right. Results prove them wrong. He took a deep breath, leaned back, swallowing the bitter taste rising in his throat. But when a bead of cold sweat slid down his temple, he knew his patience was wearing thin. 10 minutes later, as the plane prepared to push back, Brooke's voice cut through the air again, this time sharp as an interrogation. "Mr. Cross, I need to confirm that your phone has been completely turned off." Adrian opened his eyes. "It's on airplane mode." He held up the screen. "We require it to be fully powered down, not just airplane mode." "For what reason?" "For safety." A passenger behind them sighed quietly, clearly growing annoyed. Brooke noticed, but she didn't back down. She needed to assert her power, however small, in this confined kingdom. Adrian let out a quiet laugh, not one of amusement, but the kind of laugh a man gives when he recognizes a game. "Do you really think I could bring down the plane with a phone call?" Brooke inhaled sharply. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have to call the captain." "Go ahead." The air thickened. Several pairs of eyes turned toward them, watching like an audience at a play. Brooke turned away, lips pressed tight, her steps heavy as she marched toward the cockpit. And in that moment, Adrian knew she wasn't going to ask for help. She was going to find a way to remove him. The cockpit door opened. Captain Thomas Grayson stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, face expressionless. His voice was firm, professional. "Mr. Cross, my crew has informed me that you've refused to comply with instructions and displayed disruptive behavior. We can't proceed with takeoff under these circumstances." Adrian met his gaze. "She's lying. I've followed every regulation from luggage to phone protocol. The only issue here is that she doesn't like seeing someone like me sitting here." Grayson squinted. "Someone like you?" Adrian replied, voice calm and low. "Someone who doesn't look like what she's used to seeing in first class." A silence fell. No one spoke, but everyone understood. The captain exhaled. "I'll have airport security escort you off the plane. We have a zero-tolerance policy for any behavior that makes the crew feel unsafe." "Unsafe?" Adrian repeated, a faint smile crossing his lips. "I was sitting here, reading the news, listening to bark. If that makes her feel unsafe, the problem isn't me." "I'm sorry, Mr. Cross. Please collect your belongings and leave the aircraft." As two security officers approached, Adrian stood slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up his briefcase. Every movement was calm, so calm it made others uneasy. The cabin light cast across his face, composed, still, resolute. He looked at Brooke, then at the captain, and said softly, "You've just made the biggest mistake of your careers." It wasn't a threat. It was prophecy. He turned and walked down the aisle. The sound of his polished shoes striking the cabin floor echoed like a verdict. The door opened, and just before he stepped out, his gaze swept across the cabin. Curious eyes, fearful eyes, even a few pitying ones. He smiled, said nothing. But in his mind, the pieces of a new plan were already forming. As he entered the jet bridge, the cold neon light glinted against his skin. Behind him, Brooke's voice carried faintly through the door, quiet but clear enough for him to hear. So tired of people like that. Adrian paused for half a second. One heartbeat. One breath. Then he walked on, leaving behind the plane and the entire world that, in just a few months, he would own. Fueled by the very contempt they had shown him, the jet bridge felt like a corridor of punishment. Adrian Cross's footsteps echoed evenly against the metal floor, resonating under the cold neon lights. Each step was a heartbeat of restrained fury. Not an explosion, but a steady burn like coals in the wind. Behind him, 2 airport security officers followed, faces blank, professionalism masking indifference. They didn't know who he was. They didn't need to. To them, he was just a disruptive passenger being escorted off the plane. A cheap label stuck to a man worth billions. The door closed behind him. Captain Grayson's voice came through faintly. "We're cleared for pushback. Crew, prepare for departure." First class sank back into silence. But somewhere, someone trembled slightly. The young model in seat 3C. She glanced at the video she had secretly recorded, her hand unsteady. On the screen, Adrian stood, calm, silent, not arguing, not shouting, a dignified man treated like a criminal. She exhaled and hit save. Some instinct told her that clip would matter. Beyond the glass, Adrian stopped in the terminal. He didn't walk on. He stood there, one hand gripping his briefcase handle, eyes fixed on nothing. All his life, he had mastered the art of concealing emotion. But this time, the humiliation wasn't personal anymore. He had once been denied credit, despite his company holding 10 times the collateral of the loan. He had heard partners call him fortunate for his success, but never before had contempt been so naked. A security officer spoke gently. "Sir, please move to the waiting area. We need to complete a report." Adrian turned, his gaze cold as steel. "That won't be necessary. I already know what I'll do next." In the cockpit, Captain Grayson removed his cap and sat down. Brooke Turner stood beside him, still wearing her victorious smile. "Thank you for the support, Captain. I just thought if we didn't act quickly, the flight could have become problematic." Grayson nodded, unmoved. "You did the right thing. Keeping order is the top priority." He was strange. The way he looked at me, it was like he was above you. Grayson smirked. "I meet that type all the time. Climb the ladder too fast, too confident, always assuming people discriminate against them." Brooke gave a small laugh, relieved. She felt she had just defended the integrity of first class, a small victory, but one she was proud of. She didn't know that every word she spoke, every smile she gave, was carving her name into her own sentence. 20 minutes later, as the plane lifted into the clouds, Adrian sat in the quiet of JFK's departure hall. People rushed past, but he stayed still, staring through the massive glass wall where the runway lights blinked like the heartbeat of a giant beast. Inside him, 2 pulses coexisted, one of humiliation and one of calculation. He took out his phone and called the only contact saved under initials. CD. Claire, he said, voice low and deliberate. Change the plan. Change? Where are you? JFK. I'm not going to London anymore. There's something more important. What happened? They just made a mistake, and I've found my next investment target. Claire Donovan, his loyal second in command at Onyx Capital, fell silent for a beat. She had worked with Adrian long enough to know. When he said that, it meant someone was about to lose everything. I'll book a suite for you at the Carlyle. Who do you want me to call? Samuel Ortiz. Both of you. 1 hour. He hung up. No anger, no tremor. Only focus remained in his eyes. In New York, at 2 a.m., light rain fell. Inside the suite on the 32nd floor of the Carlyle Hotel, 3 people sat around a walnut table under soft golden light. Adrian sat with his arms folded, his voice calm and razor-sharp. Her name is Brooke Turner. The captain is Thomas Grayson. They work for Lumen Air. I want to know who owns the company. Samuel Ortiz, the legal counsel with glasses and a notebook, looked up. You want to sue? It's a clear discrimination case. We could win big and make headlines. Adrian shook his head. I don't want to win. I want to own. The room fell silent. Claire leaned forward, her eyes catching the spark he had just lit. You plan to acquire them? Adrian replied, his tone unnervingly calm. Not just them. Their parent company. I'm not asking for an apology. I'll demand the right to give orders. Samuel exhaled. Lumen Air isn't big, but their parent company is. A global conglomerate. How do you plan to pull that off? Adrian smiled faintly. The same way I always do. Start with a small mistake, then turn it into a collapse. He stood and walked to the window. Raindrops streaked the glass, reflecting his face, composed, dark, defined between fury and poise. They thought they removed a problem from first class, Adrian said quietly. But what they really did was open the door for the storm. At 30, 5,000 feet, Lumen Air Flight 107 cruised through the sea of clouds. In the cabin, Brooke Turner poured champagne for passengers, her smile relaxed. She didn't know that far below, the man she had just expelled from seat 2A was rewriting the future of her airline, line by line, plan by plan, number by number. And this time he didn't just want his seat back, he wanted the cabin, the crew, and the entire sky. The New York rain fell hard against the glass of the Carlyle Hotel's 32nd floor. Thin flashes of lightning tore through the sky, underlining the decision about to be spoken, the decision that would alter the fate of thousands. Inside the spacious room sat only 3 people. Adrian Cross sat at the center, his back straight, eyes fixed on the window. The golden light reflected off the walnut table, carving sharp lines across his face like a sculptor's blade. Across from him, Claire Donovan, Chief Operating Officer of Onyx Capital, held an iPad displaying a stock chart. Beside her, Samuel Ortiz, the company's legal counsel, flipped through his notebook, pen poised. No one spoke. They were used to this kind of silence, the silence before a tsunami, when Adrian was about to issue an order. He set his glass of wine down, his voice low and unnervingly calm. We're not going to sue. Claire looked up slightly. Not sue? Adrian, you were publicly humiliated. The entire cabin looked at you like a criminal. You have video evidence, witnesses, the law on your side. This was blatant racial discrimination. We could win easily. Adrian smiled faintly, but it was a smile laced with irony. Win? And then what? They send me a check, issue a scripted apology, fire one flight attendant, and host a 3-day diversity training seminar. Then everything goes back to normal. They lose a few million. I lose a few weeks. The system stays the same. Samuel interjected. But you could make them pay. Take it public. Shake the media. Lumen's reputation would collapse. Adrian turned to him, his eyes sharp as a blade. Wrong. I don't want their reputation to collapse. I want them to collapse. The air grew heavy. Claire set her iPad down. Then what are you planning? Adrian rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the window. The city reflected off the glass, a maze of light, rain, and power. Lumen Air is just a doorway. I want to know who's holding the key. Samuel understood instantly. He opened his laptop and began typing rapidly. Lumen Air, subsidiary of Meridian Holdings Group. MHG is publicly listed in London. They own a chain of hotels, a shipping company, and an aviation conglomerate. That's Lumen. Chairman of the board, Sir Benedict Hawthorne, 60.6, British aristocrat, third generation in a corporate dynasty. Net worth approximately £20 to £5 billion. Adrian nodded slightly. And he thinks he's untouchable. He turned back toward them, his gaze steady. Good. Then we'll buy his throne. Claire leaned back, her eyes widening with equal parts awe and excitement. You're talking about a takeover? Not an ordinary one, Adrian replied, his voice deep, each word like the strike of a hammer. This will be a ghost hunt. I won't knock on the door. I'll walk through the walls. Samuel frowned. Adrian, Meridian is massive. They control dozens of subsidiaries, shareholders spread across Europe. To buy a controlling stake, you'd need billions. Even Onyx couldn't conceal a transaction that size. Adrian returned to the table and unlocked his phone, the screen lighting up with streams of financial data. Wrong. We don't need full control yet. We need influence. We'll collect it piece by piece through dozens of shell entities, each holding less than 5%. Below disclosure thresholds, no one will know who we are. By the time they realize, it'll be too late. Claire looked at him, admiration and unease flickering in her eyes. You're talking about a financial coup d'etat? Adrian smiled faintly. No, a structured punishment. I'm going to teach them a lesson about power, not in the sky, but on the ground. Samuel pressed his palms to the table, voice grave. If you do this, you'll make yourself an enemy of the entire British financial establishment. Adrian turned to him, locking eyes. I don't need to be part of their club. I'll buy their club. A long silence followed. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering the windows like the applause of fate. Claire opened her laptop, fingers flying over the keys. Fine. I'll have the analytics team trace the entire ownership structure of MHG. We'll need a list of major shareholders, bond obligations, cash flow statements, and audit reports. And I, Samuel added, will build a network of shell companies in the Caymans, Panama, and Liechtenstein. Everything clean, legal, untraceable. Adrian looked at them and nodded. Do it. We start tomorrow morning. But remember, he paused, his eyes glacial. This isn't just retaliation. This is a test. I want to see if, when pushed to the bottom of prejudice, people still have the courage to rise. When Claire and Samuel left the room, Adrian remained by the window. Lightning flashed, reflecting across his face, the face of a man once underestimated, now ready to deliver judgment. He took out his phone and opened his contacts. The name Lumen Air, Complaint Depot, appeared. He swiped left and deleted it. Then he opened notes and typed a single line. New target, Meridian Holdings Group. He pressed save, then set the phone down. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside him, another storm had begun to take shape. The storm of calculated revenge, of justice bought with shares. Somewhere far above, at 36,000 feet, Brooke Turner was smiling at passengers, raising a glass of champagne, proud she had preserved the standards of first class. She had no idea that each drop falling into that glass was the first ripple of the tsunami already on its way. The next morning, Manhattan was wrapped in a thin layer of mist. The city moved with its usual rhythm, the honking of cars, the shuffle of footsteps, the hiss of coffee steaming in paper cups. But on the 52nd floor of Onyx Capital Headquarters, the air was dense, charged like a laboratory moments before an explosion. Adrian Cross entered the conference room in a dark blue suit and silver-grey tie, his eyes sharp as a scalpel. Across the table sat Claire Donovan and the financial analysis team. Everyone stood the moment he walked in. At the far end of the room, the screen displayed the logo of Meridian Holdings Group, bold gold letters against a black background. Beneath it sprawled a web of charts, diagrams, and interlaced lines. Claire began her report, her voice fast and precise like a bullet. We've completed the sweep. Meridian is a classic British-style conglomerate, heavy on tradition, light on efficiency. Their portfolio consists of 4 main divisions: aviation under Lumen Air, the Imperial Grand Hotel chain, Blue Tide Logistics in maritime transport, and an internal pension investment fund. Total market value, roughly £25 billion, but their financial structure is fragile. Adrian tilted his head slightly, signaling her to go on. They're carrying over £6 billion in debt from last year's acquisition of the Caravel Hotel. Operating cash flow is weak. Profit margins have dropped 14%. In other words, she paused, looking directly at him with a faint smile. It's a giant beast, fat on the outside, bleeding on the inside. Adrian didn't smile, but a spark flickered in his eyes. Their chairman. Claire tapped to the next slide. A photograph appeared. Sir Benedict Hawthorne, silver-haired, ruddy, faced, a thick gold ring on his hand, smiling at a ribbon. Cutting ceremony. 3rd-generation aristocrat. His father and grandfather were post-war industrial investors. He inherited the chairmanship 12 years ago. The financial press calls him the gatekeeper of the last century. Still writes handwritten letters, hates email, doesn't like outsiders. The MHG board has 11 members. 8 of them are old schoolmates, relatives, or gentlemen from his hunting club. Adrian leaned back in his chair. An old castle built on prejudice and Scotch. Exactly, Claire replied. And beneath that castle the foundation is cracking. I found evidence of an underfunded pension scheme, nearly £300 million short. They've been propping it up with MHG stock. A 10% drop in share value would render the fund illiquid. Adrian nodded slowly. Good. A weakness that can become leverage. When a man sits on a glass throne, all it takes is one pebble. Samuel entered the room just as the words left Adrian's lips, carrying a thick folder. "And here's the second pebble," he said, placing it on the table. "Meridian's ownership structure is extremely manipulable. 55% of its shares are held by British funds and individuals, none holding more than 6%. The rest is scattered across Northern Europe and the US. If we accumulate small portions, we could reach 15 to 20% without anyone noticing, at least for 6 months. Claire glanced at Adrian, her voice dropping. "You're planning a direct strike at the center?" Adrian rose slowly, walked towards the screen, and with a laser pointer traced the glowing Meridian logo. "No. We'll strike from the shadows. I want them to hear the thunder without knowing when the lightning will hit." The room fell silent. Everyone understood the operation had begun. A plan that could shake London itself. Adrian turned back to the table, his tone crisp with command. Claire was to form Project Raven, a team dedicated to analyzing shareholders and identifying weak links in Meridian's governance structure. Samuel was to build a network of shell companies in 3 financial havens, each acquiring small stakes through multiple exchanges. The communications department, complete silence. No trace leading back to Onyx. He continued, voice measured and firm. "This isn't a transaction. It's a covert war. And every strike must be surgical." Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with both worry and admiration. She knew Adrian wasn't merely seeking revenge. This was a declaration. A man of color, once expelled from first class, was now preparing to seize the highest seat of a British empire. The meeting ended. Alone in the room, Adrian opened his laptop and pulled up the photo of Sir Benedict Hawthorne once more. In it, the old chairman raised a glass among fellow aristocrats, smiling with self-satisfaction. Adrian stared for a long moment, then murmured, "You won't know who I am until I'm sitting in your chair." Outside, the New York sky turned grey, heavy with a second storm. But inside, Adrian Cross had already begun to ignite another. A storm of numbers, of shares, and of wounded pride. Across the Atlantic, in his oak-panelled office, Sir Benedict Hawthorne sipped his afternoon tea, completely unaware that the empire his family had built over 3 generations was beginning to rot from within, all because of a flight attendant whose name he had never heard. 2 weeks later, deep beneath the Onyx Capital headquarters, a hidden floor known only by its codename, The Forge, glowed under cold blue light. The walls were covered with screens streaming market data from London, Zurich, Frankfurt, and New York. Every moving number pulsed like the heartbeat of a campaign taking shape, a war without blood, one that could bury an empire. In the center of the room, Adrian Cross entered with a slow, steady stride, calm yet so intense that those nearest could feel an invisible pressure radiating from him. Ahead stood Claire Donovan and Samuel Ortiz, flanked by Onyx's most elite financial strategists. Across the main display was a title in stark white: Project Spectre, the Ghost Operation. Claire began the briefing, her tone crisp and unwavering. We'll execute in 4 phases, quietly, without leaving a trace. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. Samuel pointed at the cash flow diagram. We've registered 23 shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Liechtenstein and Luxembourg. Each entity will purchase small volumes of MHG shares, rotating across European exchanges. The goal: accumulate 4.9% within the first 3 months, below the disclosure threshold. Adrian listened without interruption. Every figure on the screen beat in sync with his accelerating pulse. Claire continued, by fragmenting transactions and rotating company identities, we'll turn the market itself into a smoke screen. To analysts, it'll appear as nothing more than a mild wave of interest from scattered funds. No one will suspect a single force is consolidating power in the shadows. Adrian gave a small nod, his voice low and cold. The sound of victory is silence. Claire switched slides. The screen filled with Meridian Holdings Group's financial graph, a cascade of red numbers plunging downward. We've located the weak point, the internal pension fund. Sir Benedict has been using MHG stock as collateral to mask a shortfall of hundreds of millions of pounds. If the stock price drops 10%, the fund becomes insolvent. Samuel added, a faint smirk forming. Once that leaks, the media will tear them apart. Adrian folded his arms, eyes glinting like fire in the dark. Good. But we don't need to lie. We only need to tell the truth at the right moment. He raised his head, scanning the room. We'll let the press know, but not directly. Just an anonymous whisper. A single article is enough to shake the market. When trust wavers, we strike. The next slide revealed a list of major shareholders, pension funds, investment houses, and veteran fund managers. Claire spoke quickly. Within MHG's board, at least 3 members are dissatisfied with Sir Benedict. The most notable is Natalie Pierce, a new American appointee, whom he publicly dismissed during her first meeting. She's pragmatic, outspoken, and wants reform. We could reach her. Adrian closed his eyes, thinking. An old aristocrat, a woman cast aside. A perfect opening. Find a way to contact her, not publicly. No emails. I'll meet her myself. Claire smiled faintly. Planning to charm the whole board now? Adrian replied evenly, without a hint of humor. I don't charm people. I show them the future and ask where they want to stand when it arrives. The final screen displayed one colossal figure, 28%. The stake Onyx aimed to control. Beneath it, a single caption read, "When the threshold is crossed, the empire will collapse from within." Samuel's voice lowered. The day we file the 13D, the market will erupt. Sir Benedict will wake up in a world where his power has already been transferred to a man he's never met. Adrian stepped forward, placing his hand on the cool glass of the control console. That won't be the day I take revenge. It'll be the day I reclaim the voice of those who were once told they didn't belong. I want them to understand this. Prejudice has a market price, and I'm buying it. The room fell silent. Only the hum of the servers remained, steady and rhythmic, like the breathing of a beast awakening from its sleep. Claire looked at Adrian, her gaze a mix of awe and unease. "You know, Adrian," she said softly, "if you fail, they'll destroy you. Not just your career, but your name. A man of colour challenging the British aristocracy, they'll never forgive you." Adrian met her eyes, a faint, serene smile crossing his lips, the calm of someone who had long learned to stand in the eye of the storm. "They won't forgive," he said quietly, "but they'll remember. And in history, I'd rather be the one hated for the right reason than loved at the wrong time." Outside, the crimson glow of sunset spilled over the Manhattan skyline. The city blazed to life, and within Adrian Cross, Project Spectre had officially begun. Across the ocean in London, Sir Benedict Hawthorne lifted a glass of port beside his fireplace, smiling at the quarterly profit report, unaware that half a world away, a hand had already begun tugging at the strings beneath his throne. 6 months later, the financial world still appeared unchanged. London buzzed as always with the honking of black cabs, gentlemen in tailored suits, sipping afternoon tea while discussing stocks as if nothing had shifted. But beneath that calm surface, an earthquake had begun to spread. In the basement of Onyx Capital, Project Spectre, the ghost operation, had entered its most dangerous phase. Hundreds of small buy orders, scattered across the exchanges of London, Zurich, and Frankfurt, were being executed through innocuous-sounding entities: North Shore Holdings, Eurivest Partners, Golden Meridian Limited. Each share acquired was a stepping stone in a silent coup. By the end of the second quarter, Adrian Cross and his team had quietly accumulated 4.9% of Meridian Holdings Group, just low enough to avoid detection, yet powerful enough to wait for the right moment to strike. One late evening, the white lights of the forge reflected off Claire Donovan's face as she typed non-stop, the string of numbers flickering like the heartbeat of a living organism. When the chart was complete, she turned, eyes gleaming as if she had discovered gold veins in stone. "I've found the weakness," she said. Adrian, standing by the window listening to classical music through his headphones, lifted his head. "Which weakness?" "Not Lumen Air, not the Imperial Hotels, the Internal Pension Fund." She activated the main screen. It flared red with collapsing trend lines. Sir Benedict has been using MHG stock as collateral to cover the pension shortfall. They overvalued projected returns, and the fund is reinvesting directly into MHG shares. A mere 10% drop in stock value would make the fund insolvent. Samuel Ortiz exhaled, muttering, "A ticking time bomb." Claire's thin smile sharpened. "We just have to flip the switch." 2 days later, Adrian sat in his Manhattan apartment, calling through an encrypted line to a man in London, Michael Davies, a veteran journalist at the Financial Times. "Michael," he said, his tone low and even, "I hear Meridian Holdings is still using pension spreadsheets from 1999. Davies chuckled. "You got a source?" "Just someone who likes financial justice." Adrian ended the call without another word. 2 weeks later, the article exploded onto the front page. "The Gilt-Edged Gamble, Meridian Holdings Pension Fund on the Brink." The report was so detailed it rocked the financial community. It exposed Sir Benedict Hawthorne's mismanagement, revealing how he had used imaginary profits to cover real losses, and warned that thousands of employees could lose their pensions if the market turned. Within a day, MHG's stock plunged 5%. The next day, another 8%. The media swarmed, investors panicked, and analysts began calling MHG the Titanic of the 21st century. In London, inside his oak-panelled office, Sir Benedict slammed the Financial Times onto his desk. "Who dares do this?" The board sat in silence. A few members lowered their heads, others exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke because they knew the article wasn't wrong. "This is slander!" Benedict roared. "Find the source of the leak. I want them crushed." An older board member murmured, "Sir, perhaps we should launch an internal investigation." "Investigate what?" Benedict barked. "I know who's behind this. The Americans. Those hedge fund vultures circling our carcass." He didn't realize that the vulture he cursed was already flying right above his head. A week later, as the markets spun into chaos, Adrian gave the order. "Begin Phase 2. The Onyx shell companies moved in unison. As terrified investors dumped their shares, Adrian bought them all. Each small block of stock was quietly absorbed, the surging volume dismissed as normal market reaction. Within 20 days, Onyx's ownership had risen from 4.9% to 15.2%. No one noticed. No paper reported it. Claire studied the numbers and smiled. "We've just become Meridian Holdings' largest shareholder, and they still think they're safe." Adrian's eyes hardened like steel. "Now we need an ally on the inside." 3 days later, in Geneva, amid the glass corridors of the Women in Leadership Conference, Adrian Cross approached Natalie Pierce, the only independent female director of MHG, the same woman Sir Benedict had publicly interrupted during a board meeting. "Natalie Pierce," he said, voice deep and steady. She turned, startled. "And you are?" "Adrian Cross, Onyx Capital." He smiled slightly, his gaze sharp enough to read her thoughts. "I'm not here for the conference. I'm here for Meridian's future." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you want from me?" "Not from me," Adrian replied calmly. "From them. They need someone brave enough to save the company from its past." He handed her a sleek black business card engraved with 2 silver words, Onyx Capital. "In 4 weeks, the world will learn that I own 28% of Meridian Holdings. When that day comes, you'll have a choice. Stay with a rotting empire or step into the future with me." He bowed slightly and walked away, leaving Natalie standing in the center of the conference hall, her heart pounding, the lights reflecting off the card in her hand, a proposition both terrifying and irresistible. That night in London, Sir Benedict sat in his office, the firelight flickering across his flushed face. He had no idea that outside, the world he believed he ruled was already slipping from his grasp, and the enemy he had never met was tightening his grip around him, like a ghost reaching for a throne. 4 weeks later. Morning in London began with mist and cups of mint tea, but at exactly 8:30 a.m., a storm of information swept through Threadneedle Street faster than any rain in the history of British finance. Every major financial outlet lit up with the same headline. Onyx Capital, the American fund founded by Adrian Cross, acquires 28% of Meridian Holdings, launches bid for chairmanship. Within 30 minutes, Meridian Holdings Group's stock price shot upward so violently that trading had to be halted twice. The financial world was stunned, and Sir Benedict Hawthorne, fresh from breakfast at the Royal Club, stood frozen in the mirrored lobby, the Financial Times trembling in his hands. "Who is Adrian Cross?" he asked hoarsely, his voice cracking like glass. No one answered, because everyone was asking the same question. Across the Atlantic, inside Onyx Capital's Manhattan headquarters, the atmosphere was eerily calm. Adrian sat at the center of the boardroom, with Claire Donovan and Samuel Ortiz on either side. On the massive screen in front of them, dozens of news channels played simultaneously: CNBC, Bloomberg, BBC, Sky News, all repeating his name. Claire smiled, a mixture of pride and disbelief. The world just woke up to discover that the man they threw out of seat 2A is now sitting in their chairman's chair. Samuel spoke softly, almost like an oath. Project Spectre is complete. They have nowhere left to hide. Adrian remained silent, his eyes fixed on the scrolling headline at the bottom of the screen. Meridian calls emergency meeting. Shareholders welcome Onyx Capital's necessary reform initiative. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. His voice was calm, but glacial. They wanted a lesson in real power. Now, they'll get one. In London, the offices of MHG erupted into chaos. An emergency meeting was called. Sir Benedict sat at the head of the table, his face pale. Senior executives whispered to each other, while the stock chart flickered red and green on the screen behind them. 28%, Benedict hissed. "How? We didn't see them on the shareholder list?" A trembling voice answered. "They used more than 20 intermediary companies." "Sir, the trades were routed through 3 exchanges. Entirely legal." "Vultures!" Benedict slammed his palm on the table, his gold ring clanging loudly. "Some American thinks he can buy out 3 generations of my family's home family's legacy over my dead body." That afternoon, he appeared live on the BBC. When the interviewer asked about Adrian Cross, Benedict sneered, "Mr. Cross, or anyone like him, comes from a different world. A world of short-term profits, tricks, and greed. We at Meridian stand for tradition, for heritage, for dignity." The interviewer pressed, "But your company has stagnated for 7 years. Mr. Cross has a proven record of restructuring global corporations. Investors seem to welcome his leadership." Sir Benedict's face reddened as he interrupted. "He doesn't understand. Money isn't everything. There are things like standards, conduct, qualities that people like him." He stopped mid-sentence, but it was too late. The entire country had heard the true meaning behind his words. People like him. By the next morning, that phrase appeared on every front page in Britain. In New York, Adrian Cross rewatched the interview, a faint curve forming on his lips. Not a smile of joy, but the expression of a man watching his enemy dig his own grave. "He just made himself the symbol of everything I came to dismantle," he murmured. "Thank you, Sir Benedict." Claire nodded. "It's time to announce our next move." Adrian turned to Samuel. "Draft a letter to all shareholders. Title it, 'A Pathway to Renewed Value.' I'll sign it." The following day, every major investment fund received a 42-page document. Not a single insult, no mention of race or revenge. The tone was analytical, precise, and clinical. The letter dissected Meridian Holdings like a surgeon performing an autopsy, identifying inefficiencies, wasteful spending, and managerial decay. It ended with a message that read, "It is time for Meridian to stop living in the past. I did not come to destroy, but to rebuild. I do not wish to take their legacy, only to prove that a legacy survives only when it evolves." Adrian Cross. Within 48 hours, 82% of institutional shareholders publicly endorsed his restructuring plan. Meanwhile, inside the offices of Lumen Air, the same subsidiary that had once thrown him out of seat 2A, CEO Philip Harrington sat frozen as the name Adrian Cross appeared on his monitor. He pulled out an old complaint file he had once signed, a polite letter of apology and a $500 voucher for the inconvenience. He remembered it vividly, and now understood that the small humiliation he had dismissed as trivial had become the storm tearing through his entire career. That evening, from her apartment overlooking the River Thames, Natalie Pierce called Adrian. Her tone was calm, but slightly trembling. "I read your letter. You're right. This company is rotting from the inside. I'm in." Adrian's voice was quiet, steady. "Good. When the storm breaks, stand firm. We're not just changing the chairman's seat. We're changing the entire board." That night in Mayfair, Sir Benedict Hawthorne sat alone in his oak-panelled office, staring at the television where Adrian Cross's face appeared on CNBC. There was no arrogance in Adrian's expression, no anger, only a still, unwavering confidence that was terrifying in its composure. For the first time in his life, Sir Benedict felt fear. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of losing his place in a world he believed would always belong to him. And he had no idea that by the next morning, Adrian Cross would step onto the stage at the extraordinary shareholders' meeting, and with a single speech lasting less than 5 minutes, bring down a 3-generation empire. Morning in London. The day of reckoning. Outside the Savoy Hotel, rows of luxury cars lined the Strand. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras flashing endlessly. Amid the crowd gleamed a brass plaque engraved with the words, "Special Shareholders Meeting, Meridian Holdings Group." Inside, the grand hall had been transformed into a vast conference chamber. The walnut-panelled walls and chandeliers reflected a cold brilliance across hundreds of faces, investors, lawyers, journalists, and those gathered to witness the fall of an empire. In the front row, Sir Benedict Hawthorne sat upright, his face composed, though his hands trembled faintly beneath the table. Across the room, Adrian Cross entered with Claire Donovan, Samuel Ortiz, and Natalie Pierce. His gaze swept across the crowd, not proud, not angry, but calm, the look of a man who already knew he had won. A wave of murmurs rose. Eyes turned toward him. That's him, the American, the man who bought all of Meridian just to teach them a lesson. The moderator struck the gavel. "We are here today to vote on the proposal to remove the current board of directors and chairman." Sir Benedict stood, his voice deep but strained as he tried to preserve a sense of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have devoted my life to Meridian. This company is not just a financial institution. It is the legacy of 3 generations of Englishmen. Do not let an outsider with deep pockets and arrogance destroy what we have built. Meridian is not a toy for speculators." Scattered applause followed, mostly from his aging allies in the front row. Benedict drew a breath, his voice shaking. "They speak of profit and numbers. I speak of dignity. We cannot let this company fall into the hands of someone who does not understand who we are." His final words fell into a heavy silence. Many turned toward Adrian, the dark-skinned man, 3 decades younger than Benedict, seated calmly with his fingers interlaced on the table. Then he stood. Adrian Cross walked to the podium. The room fell completely silent. He carried no papers, no teleprompter, only the voice of someone who understood the weight of every word. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his rich Anglo-American tone steady and deliberate. "Sir Hawthorne just spoke about history. I will speak about the future." A pause. His eyes swept across the room, meeting each face, each wary glance, each flicker of uncertainty. For the past 10 years, Meridian has not been a beacon of the financial world. It has been a museum, a place that displays the past, polished by heritage, but stagnant in vision. And while you sit here speaking of honor, your employees are losing faith, your investors are losing money, and your pension fund is breaking apart. A few heads lowered. The faint rustle of papers echoed. "I am not here to destroy Meridian," Adrian continued, his voice growing firmer with each word. "I am here to save it from its own complacency. We will restructure, cut away the waste, sever the rotten ties. We will replace tradition with accountability and legacy with results." He paused, bowed his head slightly, then delivered the final line. Short, but like a hammer's strike. "Because a company deserves to exist only when it treats everyone who walks through its doors with fairness." Silence gripped the room. Then a single clap. Then another. Within seconds, the hall rose to its feet, applause crashing against the ceiling like thunder. Sir Benedict Hawthorne sat frozen, his face pale as chalk. He understood. It was over. When the voting results appeared on the screen, the number shone clear. 82% in favor of removing Sir Benedict Hawthorne as chairman of the board. The moderator's voice rang like a funeral bell. "Mr. Adrian Cross has been elected as the new chairman of Meridian Holdings Group." The room erupted in noise. Reporters flooded in like a wave. Claire placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder. Samuel smiled with pride. But Adrian remained still, expressionless. He approached Benedict, who slumped in his chair, eyes dim. Adrian leaned down, speaking softly, only for him to hear. "A word of advice, Sir Hawthorne. When you're at the top, learn to bow to those below. Because when you fall, they will be the ones still looking up." Benedict's lips trembled. Who are you?" Adrian looked at him, his eyes glowing under the camera flashes. "I'm just a passenger. The man your airline once told didn't belong in first class." Then he turned and walked away. Outside the Savoy, the press swarmed the steps. As Adrian emerged, microphones thrust toward him. "Mr. Cross, is this an act of revenge? What message do you have for those who doubted you?" He paused briefly, smiling faintly, his voice deep and calm. "Not revenge. A redefinition of justice." He walked on, through the flashes and the frenzy. Above London, the grey clouds began to part, revealing the pale light of dawn. An empire had fallen. A new era had begun. The next morning, the Financial Times opened with a headline stretching across its front page. From seat 2A to the chairman's seat, Adrian Cross and the revolution at Meridian Holdings. In less than 24 hours, the news spread across the world. A man once expelled from first class because of prejudice now held power over the very corporation that owned the airline responsible. It sounded like a novel, except this was real. In the former office of Sir Benedict Hawthorne, the early light fell across a thin layer of dust covering the gold-plated nameplate. On the desk lay a thick envelope containing the internal financial investigation report. The first line, bold and damning, read, "Uncontrolled spending. Personal expenses exceeding £12 million." Benedict had already signed his withdrawal agreement, surrendering all privileges in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. He quietly sold his Cotswolds estate and moved to the coast. The man once hailed as the gentleman of the market was now nothing more than a name erased from the club registry. An old monument had crumbled in silence. Adrian never mentioned him again. Revenge had never been the goal. He only wanted to restore what was right. At Lumen Air, CEO Philip Harrington sat motionless in the boardroom. His phone rang non-stop. On the other end was the new office of the board of directors. The secretary's voice came through, calm and cold. "Mr. Harrington, Chairman Cross would like to speak with you directly." His throat went dry. "Yes, please connect me." A click. Then Adrian's voice came through, low and precise. No introduction needed. "Mr. Harrington, I've reviewed Lumen's recent reports. Profits are down 12%. Customer satisfaction is at its lowest in a decade. And apparently there's an issue with the company's service culture." "Sir, Adrian cut him off, his tone sharp as steel. "I don't want excuses. 6 months ago, you received a complaint letter. You handled it with a $500 voucher. Today, the price of that arrogance is your position. Please give me another chance." "That chance is gone. Clear your office by the end of the day. I want someone who understands that every passenger is an honorary shareholder of this company." Adrian hung up. No satisfaction. Just balance restored. 2 weeks later, he convened a meeting at Meridian headquarters. The screen displayed the full restructuring plan. Leadership changes. Natalie Pierce, promoted to CEO, the first in company history not from Europe. Rebirth of Lumen Air. Full rebranding, a complete redesign of first-class interiors, and a new training initiative titled Respect Above Altitude. The creation of the Cross Horizons Scholarship Fund to support underprivileged students studying aviation and engineering. Adrian spoke during the meeting, his voice deep and steady. "I don't want Lumen to be just an airline. I want it to be proof that fairness can fly." The room erupted in applause. Not out of fear, but belief. 3 months later, Brooke Turner, the former chief flight attendant, who once threw him out of seat 2A, sat in her small New Jersey apartment. She had just been fired. A headline was spreading online. Airline Karen fired after viral discrimination scandal. The old video, recorded by the model that day, had suddenly resurfaced. Brooke's face, her tone, her disdainful expression, shared millions of times. Messages poured in, filled with hate. No airline would hire her. No store would take her on. One evening, while watching the news, she saw Adrian on screen, speaking at a global conference on leadership and equality. He never mentioned her name, but every word pierced like a blade. True power is not about removing someone from a seat. It is about building a world where no one ever needs to be removed. Brooke turned off the television. For the first time, she cried, not for losing her job, but because she realized she had become the lesson of a new era. 1 year later. The sky above the Atlantic stretched silver blue. The new Lumen Air A350 glided smoothly at 35,000 feet. In first class, the cabin glowed softly, the interiors pristine. A young flight attendant with warm brown skin and bright eyes smiled as she leaned forward. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cross. It's an honor to have you with us." "Champagne?" Adrian shook his head gently. "Water is fine, thank you." She nodded and walked away. Adrian rested back into seat 2A, the very seat from which he had once been humiliated. Now it was no longer a symbol of status. It was proof of justice. He looked out the window. The clouds stretched like ribbons of white silk. Below, the world still turned. Prejudice still existed, but at least he had shifted it a little closer to fairness. Adrian closed his eyes. In the quiet cabin, only the steady hum of the engines remained, like the heartbeat of the sky. "They threw me out of seat 2A, he thought, and because of that, I learned how to fly higher. The headline on the evening news captured it all, from the man kicked off a plane to the one who bought the sky. No one saw Adrian smile as he read it, because for him, the real victory wasn't in the stock price, the title, or the headlines. The real victory was seeing people once overlooked, as he had been, walk through the doors of first class without bowing their heads. Justice at last had learned to fly. And so the journey of Adrian Cross came to a close, not with applause, not with loud revenge, but with a silence full of power. From a seat that was taken away, he reclaimed the entire sky. From a look of disdain, he built a world where respect no longer needed permission. He didn't just buy back a corporation or replace a chairman. He redefined what power truly meant, that it doesn't live in suits, business cards, or titles, but in how we choose to treat others, even when we have the power not to. Now, every time a Lumen Air flight takes off, people don't just speak of luxury or class. They speak of a lesson that pride can make us soar, but only kindness keeps us in the sky. And Adrian, he still sits there, in seat 2A, quietly gazing out the window, knowing that justice doesn't need to be loud. Because those who once looked down on him now have to look up to see that a man once thrown off a plane could become the one who owns the sky. If this story touched you, leave a like to help spread its message of fairness and dignity. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the journeys to come, where even the smallest wound can spark the fire that changes the world. And drop 3 short words in the comments. Justice takes flight.